Such a bad thing to be disrespectful to Rahul Masekela and cut him before he completes his rendition of Unomani. I hope everybody enjoyed on time. I'll just do a bit of administration and introduce myself. That my name is Olwam Mnqwazi. I currently own and run a company called Black Hat, and I'll just leave the website for everyone in their own time to just find out what we do. That's not what we're going to do today. I know Enver. I think I have met Enver in 2012, whilst I was working for the university, Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University at the time. And I, ever since meeting Enver, knew that Enver is somebody who must be shared across, the ends of the world. In particular, my generation, because whenever I speak to Enver, I feel like I'm opening a book. I feel like I'm walking into an archive. I feel like I'm walking into a library. And therefore, I have been meaning to have this conversation, but I thought, you know what, there'll never be a perfect time. Let us have the conversation as soon as possible. If possible, I would even like to host him physically with a lot of young people around, to just huddle around and listen to his energy, feel his energy and all of that. So I am that kind of a person when it comes to Enver. I know he allows us to just call him Enver, which is not what in my culture we are used to, but in no way that we feel that he's our equal. And every moment we feel like we have to be learning from him. Now I'm going to allow Enver to just come in and greet us. His video is not going to be working, but he'll just come in and greet us just for us to see if he's okay, and then he will continue with the conversation. You can greet all of us in the chat section at the moment, so that we know who's here. I can see a lot of familiar faces and people that I would like to know more about as time goes. But Enver, how are you? And you must show thyself. Okay, I see. Can you unmute yourself now? Can you greet us once more? We couldn't hear you, Enver, then.
Oh, okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
Now you, okay, all I was saying is thank you very much for your very generous and kind words. And the danger with that is that it sets up too many expectations. I'm just very glad to be in this discussion with you. As you know, we've been together some years back, and we haven't really sat down to talk to each other. So this is really good. This is really important. I wish we could we could do all this face to face. I'm not very happy about these platforms, but I must also today apologize. I've got a bit of a bad throat from coming out of a bit of asthma. So forgive me, people, if I sound a bit croaky and unclear, but I hope you can ask me questions to clarify anything I've said. So thank you, Olwam. And I'm going to switch off the camera because the reception here where I am is not great. It's bad, and it's sometimes, in Olwam, if I ever cut off completely, you must wait for 5 minutes and I'll try and get back.
Oh, okay.
It does occasionally. Yeah, it happens. So can I go off now? Or can my picture go off?
Yes, Enver, your picture can go off, but just for everyone, I have uploaded a few documents for your consideration as Enver is also talking. The one on Word, the conversation with Olwam, is really the notes that he's going to be speaking on. And I'll just be waiting on him to share whatever he needs me to share at a particular moment. But all of us, if you leave your email addresses, we'll be able to share all the information that we agree on sharing on this platform. And we spoke briefly, and it was really shortly after you've made a presentation at the Candid conference recently. And then I really felt the urge that we should follow up in a way before it's also too long, because once those thoughts are still in your mind, you still want to share in the next conversation. So I'm not going to say anything about that conversation. I'm just going to allow you, because we've also discussed privately as to what would be the nature of your contribution in this meeting. Everyone else will be able to ask to follow through on your questions if you drop them, and maybe after Enver is finished, we'll allow for you to come in also on video to ask questions, because we have an hour and a half at least up to 8 o'clock. Thank you very much. Enver?
It's over to me, is it?
It is indeed.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I sent you, I don't know if Olwam sent it over to you, but I sent you a simple one-page document in which I set out 10 things that I'm going to do today, this evening. The essential point I want to make, to be completely frank, is that I think it's about time younger people especially, stop relying on people who are over 70 years old to find ways of understanding the difficult issues that face our societies today. They should stop relying on experts. They should find ways of thinking through and analyzing the big questions which trouble all of us in society. I'm not saying this out of some kind of false modesty. I'm saying this because I think that what some of us older people have over the years regarded as absolutely key to our understanding of society might have become somewhat staid, somewhat irrelevant, some of the things, some of the big analytical premises, analytical foundations we use might have run their course. I don't know, but I certainly know from having spoken with people, young people at university, there are some things which are not very familiar to people who are over a certain age, especially my age, and who are not expert in many, many, many things. I think we have a store of knowledge, historical knowledge. I think we know a lot of facts about certain things because we've absorbed them and studied them and tried to analyze them and understand them. But I think young people must also now find their own tools, their own methods of trying to understand the difficult issues that face our societies. And that's what I'm really concerned about. So my purpose here today is about, it's about that. It's about trying to get all of you, and I learned through that, all of you to understand how important it is to be able to develop careful, systematic understanding of the nature of the society in which we are, so that one can begin thinking about what is the way out. It's very clear that we haven't found the way out. We older people, people who some of you regard as experts, we haven't found the ways out, even though we might have a vast store of knowledge about certain things. We haven't found the way out for this. And it's obvious because we still have a society which is so completely wrecked by all kinds of very serious problems and contradictions. So you have to, that's my first point. It's very important for younger people especially to start thinking through what exactly is the kind of analytical framework and what are what is the data, the factual information that you must analyze and think about so that you can begin to understand this society. The second point I want to say is that for me, understanding society is never an academic exercise. It's not about being smart or being able to write a book or to make a speech or to persuade a large number of people or any such thing. It is ultimately about how one's understanding of society enables one to participate in the process of changing it. I don't think there's anybody who can disagree with the idea that we have to change this society. We have to change this society. We have to change this ugly world. We have to change the extraordinary influence of particular kinds of ideas, of particular social visions which are foisted on millions, on billions of people by a small coterie, by a small group of extraordinarily influential people wherever they are. That in fact, the great majority of the decisions which are being made on our behalf are being made by people with whom, over whom we have very little influence and who really don't bother to speak to the great majority of the people on whom the effects of what they design are really felt. It's the millions, the billions who are the recipients of the effects of the kinds of social systems, policies, priorities, choices which are dominant in the world. So the reason for trying to understand things is not a theoretical exercise. It's not an abstract exercise. It's an absolute necessity so that we can change society. Now, my method in talking with you today, I want to speak about it I will use my experience. What else can I use? I can't speak outside the framework of my own experience and the experience of those I have worked with, I have engaged with, I have participated with in organizations, in social movements, in struggles, in personal life, in families, in communities, in academic environments, wherever I've worked. My experience comes from that. It comes from engaging with people, with those people in the first instance, and with wider social collectives beyond that. And it also comes from thinking through these issues and developing some kind of framework for thinking, what we call theory. I use both. I use experience and I use theory. I think it's absolutely essential to try and understand the wide range of things that happen in society and to draw some key principles out of that, not to the extent of excluding everything else, not to the extent of making these principles into dogma, into inflexible ideas which are forever stuck in one's brain. No, not from that perspective, but from trying to at least get some handle on the vast and complex body of ideas, complex body of material realities which affect the lives of people. So you have to have both these things. You have to have experience, which I think is primary. In my case, it certainly is primary. And you have to then use it to build some theory, which once again informs your experience. And that's the way you start understanding things. But when I speak with you today, in my life, over the last so many years, I've been through essentially two types of educational experience. The one is where you listen to somebody who tells you what the facts of life are, who sort of tells you that, look, the biggest problem is A, B, C, and D. And the answer to these problems is E, F, G, and H. That's how you have to understand the world. And they sometimes, well, certainly in the circles in which I've hung around, there's been a lot of truth in the A, B, C, and D, and the E, F, G, and H. I'm not at all knocking it. In fact, I myself have been doing a lot of that over the years, simply setting out some propositions, some ideas, some explanations about certain things, and saying, well, this is the way to understand this. And in order to get past this problem, this is what has to be done. I think it's a kind of educational method which we use 95% of the time. It's the kind of lecture mode where you tell people what are the important things, and you also tell them what you think the solutions are. And you get this every day. If you listen to these TED Talks and these great speakers, around the world, they're a fund of really very persuasive speakers, and that's what they do. I think there's some use in that, but I've grown increasingly skeptical about that, because I am of the view that when you want to understand something, some phenomenon, you have to start finding out what it is you have to understand on your own. You have to start framing the questions yourself. You can rely on other people's questions. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, since it's the problem that you're most concerned with, you have to find the questions which are relevant. Because one of the biggest problems in the world of knowledge is the problem of who is framing the question. Who exactly is asking the question, and from what perspective? And what has informed that question? What has given rise to that question? What is the basis of that question? And remember, comrades, colleagues, every single question is based on a set of assumptions. Some things which the person framing the question takes for granted, or takes as given, or has developed over the years as something to rely on. Those are the assumptions which every question brings to the table. You must, if you listen to the radio every day, as I sometimes do, and especially if you listen to the discussion around education, you will see immediately that there are a number of assumptions which inform the questions which the radio presenters have already developed in their minds. Like, for instance, a very important assumption, which I'm going to use it a little later in the discussion around unemployment, the very important assumption that, the role of education is to fix you up good and solid so that you can fit into the labor market. You'll see that people on radio and TV interviewing professors and experts in education never go beyond that assumption. They almost always take that as granted, as the starting point of the discussion. Well, my own experience over the years has told me that you're entering into an almost completely useless discussion when you start there, because you're starting at the wrong place. It's just one example. And there are literally, you can listen to nearly every discussion on the radio and on TV, and you can hear what are the assumptions, even when people phone in on the radio. If you listen to that, you will see that they have already made up their mind about certain things, and that's the basis on which they've asked a question. Well, I do that too, by the way. I too bring assumptions. I'm not denying that. But it is those assumptions which must be opened up. We have to clarify those. We have to say, well, if that's the question you're asking, or rather, if that's the basis of the question, can we examine the basis to start with, even before we think that that is the right question? So the point I'm making is that in trying to understand anything, you absolutely must be clear about the questions you want to ask and the reasons why you're asking them, and what exactly is the experience out of which that question has arisen. So this is the point about the tools of inquiry. One of the most important tools of trying to understand things is precisely what questions do you ask? You have to ask meaningful questions. And in my book, the most important questions are always framed from the perspective of those who are most affected by that question. So the issue of whose question or who's asking the question is just as important as the question. Who is asking the question? That's what we need to know. Because once again, if you read the newspapers, if you listen to the radio, if you listen to TV, who's speaking? Who's asking the questions? Who's framing the responses? Well, the great majority of the time, 99% of the time, I would say it's some or other expert academic, expert so-called. I don't particularly think that academics are all that expert. They might know some things about their own area of study, but they are almost always called upon to provide commentary on the widest range of issues, some of which they know very little about. Then it's an opinion of a political party at the moment. That's what we're listening to. We are listening to questions and answers from religious institutions. Occasionally, we do get trade unions and social movements. We get all kinds of gendered, class-based, and racialized people who are not. It's not very clear where they stand in relation to some of these big social divisions in our societies, whether they are gender divisions, class-based divisions, racialized privilege, geographic divisions, whether they're from countries of the North, whether they're from the South. And let me tell you, the most influential people, I think far and above all of these people I've talked about, are the great, big, powerful body of captains of industry, of business, the people who really have the most influence in society and the most power over what kind of society there is. And it is their voices. I mean, I don't know how many times a day you listen to the voice of experts around the economy, whether it's got to do with shares, whether it's got to do with the performance of the economy, whether it's got to do with positivity and negativity about economic growth prospects, about performance indicators, about business confidence, about investor confidence, etc., etc. You hear this all the time, and the questions which they ask and which they probe very rarely have any relationship to the real world of life of the great majority of those who are nearly always excluded from those kinds of discussions. So the question of whose tools and who is asking the questions is absolutely fundamental. And I think you must think about all of that before you make your mind up about whether what anybody is saying, including me, makes sense. By the way, I'm doing some of this today, and I am very clear about the reason why I'm doing it. I want to persuade you. I want to persuade you because I think that by your beginning to think through these fundamental questions, we will be able to make social change. I'm not at all coy about that. I'm not shy about that. I'm saying so absolutely openly that I'm hoping that by developing your analytical capacities, strengthening them by making you understand how exactly you need to go about understanding large social issues and important social questions, you might be able to participate more fully in the process of social change. The other thing that we are flooded with as part of the tools of our analysis is data, is information. Well, here's a very difficult issue because unless you yourself are aware of the comparative data of other data, are able to say, well, this data that I'm looking at is generally acceptable from the point of view of the questions that I'm asking. And unless you can say this data comes from people who I can trust have an orientation to social questions which has some meaning for me. Unless I can trust that, I have to be very skeptical about this data. You see, it's really very important to be able to assess whether a set of data has meaning from the perspective of the kind of question you want to ask, and has been produced by someone who has a relationship and understanding of those kinds of questions. Let me give you an example. If the question that you are worried about has to do with the rate of growth in an economy, then you can look up all the data which has been produced by thousands of researchers about the rate of growth of this country, of other countries, of comparative economies, of stronger economies, of weaker economies, of the sectors within each economy, of the number of the percentage participation in different sectors of the economy, etc., etc. But if you want to understand what the effects of that growth are on the population of a particular country, beyond just asking the question of what is the rate of growth, then you have to look elsewhere. Then you have to look at a different set of data. Because a country, and I'll give you an example, which may or may not be wrong or right. I'm not so sure, but I think it is right. Let me give you the example of Botswana, which has been growing fairly rapidly and dramatically over the last 10 years, much higher than South Africa, much higher than any, possibly about the highest in the continent of Africa. Well, the reason why Botswana grows rapidly is dependent on 2 or 3 sources of production. The diamond mines owned by one large diamond mining company, if it produces 50,000 nuggets or whatever the appropriate measurement is of diamonds this year, and it produces, and that constitutes 70% of the growth rate of that country. Well, and next year it produces twice that quantity, it'll go up by an appropriate increased proportion. And it'll show huge growth rates. But it won't show you how exactly De Beers, the mining company, Botswana, which is De Beers of Botswana, has distributed that increased growth in the income. And this is an absolutely fundamental issue in all growth. We've had growth in the first 10 years post-democracy, which didn't result in any increase in employment, for that matter. Did it increase in? The world has been growing over the last 100 years at the growth rate of the world economies as a whole has probably over the last 100 years multiplied 3 or 4 times. But the rate of inequality in the world has grown considerably more than the rate of growth. That's what Thomas Piketty, this is not me, this is what Thomas Piketty, a fairly conventional economist, has written, has shown us in his monumental book that despite this growth, even in the most advanced capitalist economies of the world, which have grown dramatically, and even in those countries where the incomes of, for instance, of working class people in England and USA and Germany and Europe, and in the whole of Europe and Japan, has grown dramatically compared to pre-war, before 1940, which is pre-war, and the growth rate post-1940. Although the rate of income of, and there's been a significant increase in the number of middle classes, the dividends to capital has far outstripped the dividends to labor, and has far outstripped the growth rate of economies. So the growth rate of economies, of even the most developed economies in the world, a very significant proportion of it is attributable to the fantastic growth of capital. That is why, as Piketty has shown us, the world is growing more and more and more unequal, unimaginably more unequal. It is so unequal now. And this inequality is not only an inequality within each country, including within the richest countries in the world, like the US. If I had the time, I'd show you the data on the level of inequality in the US. It's extraordinary. It is absolutely astounding. You think that you are in South Africa, because it's not very different. The rate of inequality, you'd be astounded by it. But what it does show is that not only is this rate of inequality globally growing within countries, of course it is growing between countries. And it is growing between countries of the rich, of the North and of the South. In fact, the inequality in countries of the South, 70% of that is made up by the inequality between the countries of the South and the more highly developed capitalist economies of the world. And the 30% is the inequality as a result of the kinds of distribution of wealth within countries of the South themselves. And this phenomenon is growing enormously, extraordinarily. During this pandemic, the few multi-billionaires in the world, the top 10 or 20 of them, made a few $1 trillion more. And Piketty says that there is nothing that is going to reverse this trend, global trend. Nothing is going to reverse. No present public policy, no present global covenant or agreement is going to reverse this trend. That's where we are going. We're heading in that way. And as you see, Oxfam's figures are suggesting that some 60 or 70 people in the world own the equivalent of the wealth of 3.5 billion human beings. Half the world's population, if you put it on the scale, own.
Enver, I've dropped you a private message. I'm not sure if you saw it there, but you can just maybe draw to just to close this.
Okay.
Section, and then we can
okay.
actually.
I'm sorry. Okay, no. I'm sorry. I didn't realize
No, this
Well,
is still within the time limits. I just
Okay.
wanted you to be alerted.
Oh, okay. So can I go on for 10 minutes?
Yes,
Yes, 10. All right. It's 19:12 at the moment. We're finishing at 8 o'clock, did you say?
yes, at 8 o'clock.
So can I go on? Because I had several points more, which I will rush through. I'll go through.
Yes,
Oh.
that's exactly what I said in the private chat, that you can go for 10 more minutes.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So you see the drift of where I'm going about what data and what tools. Well, let me move to the next point. The next point I wanted to talk about the relationship between diagnosis, analysis, and what can be done. All of us must think about the relationship between our diagnosis, our analysis, and what at the end of the analysis we think has to be done. And the diagnosis, for me, concerns things like, so I'm afraid I'm not going to explain in great detail. And I hope if you ask me questions, I'll explain. The diagnosis has to do with, you have to ask questions about what kind of society are we in? What is the nature of the society? What is its history? What are the structures of power? What systems? What kinds of institutions does it have? Who are the key players? Who are the people who have the greatest amount of power in an agency for supporting or impeding change? What exactly, in other words, is the role of the most important agents in this society? Agents like government, agents like the economy and the production system, agents like global institutions, which have influence over how we make policy, and of course, agents like the media, which I think are really undervalued in the power and influence they have. You know, in this country, we have a media which is owned by 5 conglomerates. So you can imagine what you have to think about their influence. You can't just take it for granted. And of course, you also have to think about the power and potential influence of social movements, the unions, and citizens, who, as we know, are also extraordinarily powerful once they are able to get their act together. So once you've done this diagnosis of the nature of society, who exactly has influence in it, what kind of influence do they wield, how do they wield their influence, you might then begin to focus on some explanations of what you understand. And there are 2 types of explanations. Some are simple explanations. And I was going to talk about simple explanations in respect of the issue of education and work. And there are more complex explanations. Olwam will tell you that I have spent a great deal of my life thinking about this particular area and its relationship to the problem of unemployment. Actually, the explanation that I wanted to deal with is about the unemployment question, because I think that is perhaps the most glaring issue. I think inequality is the most fundamental issue from my perspective, but the most glaring effect of inequality is, of course, unemployment and poverty and hunger. And I've sent 3 pieces of writing to you, to Olwam, to send to all of you, which I urge you to study. There are 3 pieces of writing, very nicely, carefully set out diagrammatically, setting out the problems of unemployment, of inequality, and of hunger, food and hunger. And then, of course, the other explanations one relies on have to do with what I talked about earlier, experience and theory. So it's very important that when trying to understand any phenomenon, you think about, you look at the simple explanations, which are in the public media every day in your face, telling you, and unfortunately, these days, the social media is as much implicated in all kinds of mumbo jumbo explanations about things. And I just struggle myself to sift fact from fiction, to try and understand, well, what explanation is this person trying to provide by sending me this kind of media clip from somewhere in the world or somewhere locally. And I have to think about it very carefully. In general, whereas initially I used to just simply hit the forward button and send it to a group of friends, I've decided that no, that is completely unjustifiable. One has to study so that one doesn't promote all kinds of falsehoods and really mystifications, which because the simplistic explanations are also very attractive explanations. They appear to solve the problem. Oh, it's so easy. Just look at that, and this is the way to solve it. Well, yeah, there are some things which have relatively easy and simple explanations, but complex social questions in which millions of people are involved, in which societies are struggling, in which there are huge contradictions, in which there are very diverse social interests, very diverse social, fragmented societies. Simple explanations will never be adequate, and you have to examine them critically. So you have to think about whether this is a simple explanation or whether it is comprehensive. It looks at, and complex explanations, really the difference between simple and complex explanations of serious issues is that simple explanations seem to think that if you can take one factor and you will be able to explain everything. Whereas in fact, in complex societies, you cannot do that because there are many factors, many complex issues, which can provide you. I'm not one of those who say that you cannot understand any phenomenon. On the contrary, I think you can understand most phenomena. You can. You don't need to have a PhD or a master's degree to do that. But you need to have some proper information, and you need to be able to think carefully around those issues and to try and bring the many complex questions into an arrangement out of which you can make sense. So simplistic explanations are really the problem. And that's what we are fed every day. Because the media loves sound bites. The media loves somebody who comes up with a nice phrase, who comes up with some catchy banner, because that's what the media does for all the, in promoting all the companies that give the media work to do, some nice catchy phrase or advert to sell a product. We're not in the business of selling products. Our job as human beings is to start to understand the nature of our society in ways which can promote humaneness, promote our relationship with each other, promote our relationship with the planet we are living in, deal with some of the most intractable and difficult issues that we have to face. So I won't go through the example I wanted to use for that purpose about simple and complex, which had to do with the problem of unemployment, but I hope you will read the 3 pieces I sent to you. I want to say 2 final points. The one is, even when you hear of somebody providing a solution, well, I'm doing that today. I'm telling you that the way to think about things is the way I have set out. So it is, I'm suggesting a solution. I'm not shy about that. But I do say to you, you have to think about who's providing this solution. And what is the relationship between that solution? Solutions generally are inverted commas. I won't just, the word solution is often just a load of hogwash. But the way out of a problem, does it resolve the social question you want to think about? That's how I think you have to examine every potential solution that is given to you. Will it help to solve the large social issues, the complex social issues, the difficult social issues, which we see around us every day? Not the issues which are named by the big economists. That the other day I heard the Reserve Bank governor saying that the solution to our problems is to keep interest rates low so that we can keep inflation down. And that's the way, well, I'm afraid. Please read Duma Kubure's piece that I sent to you. It is the pinnacle of simplistic understanding. If you think that simply keeping interest rates down is going to solve the problem of 13 million unemployed people, the problem of the most unequal society in the world, the problem where over 10 million people go to bed hungry, etc., etc., etc. So you have to ask the question, whose answer, whose solution is being given? And the last point I want to say to you is, I have grown up studying before I was an academic, before I was even a student at a university. I had the good fortune to be in an environment which somehow, I don't know how, encouraged the process of study. Well, in those days, it wasn't difficult. The country still is in a mess, but it was in a terrible mess then at that stage. And when people close to you are locked up and so on, you begin to understand the necessity of beginning to study. So I urge you to pay attention to that. Study, but use study for practical purposes, for practice. Use it for engaging, for talking with people, for creating study groups, for creating study circles, and out of that to frame actions. And the last point I want to make is also always have some doubt about the correctness of your own perspective, because that's the only way you will be able to strengthen it. That's the only way you will be able to convince yourself that what you are saying or what you are trying to promote has real meaning, when you are able to get past the doubts that you have in your own armory of thinking. The minute you become cocksure, you are completely, utterly, absolutely, without doubt, you stop learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Enver. Ending off with intellectual humility, just in case I might be wrong in my ideas and all of that. So thank you very much. I just, because as you are talking, And you are talking about some solutions that we have been given, some questions that already have been framed for us. And we engage for the rest of our lives trying to solve a question that has been framed for you, of which the question might not have any particular relevance for your own well-being. And one of those questions that I wanted to pose to you is that how can we go through education for all these years? You go through schooling of about 12 years, and then you go to university of about, let me just say about 3 to 5 years. And then we still have the problem of being regarded as not being productive, unemployed, unskilled. It's almost as if even after all these years, for me, this is one question, and I get angry about because an example is this one, that I'm helping someone to write their own life stories, and then people come and say that no, this is not how you're supposed to be sounding. Because there's this particular place that we need to be, that we basically are not getting to. Even I'm 37 years old and I'm still being told that I'm not there yet. And there are these unemployed graduates in the country who are, again, have to go and pursue something other than what they are and what they have in order to make it. And I'm asking this question in relation to this. I have a sense that someone has framed a question that we are constantly trying to answer, but it's not our question that can affect our own reality.
Yes. Well, as I said, Olwam, it's an area I've studied for, thought about very long, and there's a book which a colleague of mine and myself have written on this issue, so I can speak for very long. And I know we have only. So can I ask that we take a few questions, unless you insist that I answer this big question, and then otherwise I might overdo the answer and take up time. I'm worried about.
I'm opening the floor for further questions to Enver.
I haven't forgotten your question. I've got your question down.
Yes, you can type the question down, or you can also actually come and just ask Enver. At least you have a minute to just frame your question and pose it to Enver.
Where can I find the questions? Are they written? Are there some written questions, Olwam?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, good. Well, while people are thinking, because shall I just have a shot at your question?
Yes, Enver.
Because people have not yet asked. Okay, well, as you know, you've answered your question. The answer is that it's the education system in capitalist societies, every capitalist society, not just South Africa. Don't let anyone make you think that there are education systems in developed capitalist societies which do anything different. They are essentially a development of the process of capitalist modernization. That's what has happened to education. The old humanist ideas about education have largely gone down the drain, gone by the wayside. What we are now left with is a solid core of what might be called instrumental education. Education as an instrument. As an instrument to what? As an instrument to make people fit
the requirements of the capitalist labor market to be able to work in mines, in factories, in service industries, et cetera, in particular ways. And the biggest problem from the research that we did in trying to put together that book was that, well, of course, there is a need for a lot of types of work. There is in a capitalist economy. But the job of capitalist economies is not to create jobs, it is to use labor to derive profit. Its function is not at all directed at the job of creating jobs. And so, as far as that system is concerned, the purpose of and function of training, really, and education is really it's hardly that anymore. Nearly all of it is directed, certainly in the post-school period, to various types of training, either professional training, even in the universities. You know, you train to become a professional of one or other kind. With a basic degree, you don't get employed. Nowadays, you don't get employed even with a training degree. But you know, the whole purpose of it is not to leave you at the end of a basic degree. It is to then to train you in some or other kind of profession, because that's what is required by the labor market. You have to become something, an artisan of some kind, an engineer of some kind, a medical professional, a lawyer, a train driver, a worker in a textile factory, etc., etc. And in fact, you know, many adult education organizations also do the job of training people in domestic labor, in being efficient domestic workers. So the whole of the education and training system is almost entirely, I'm not saying completely, you know, 100%. There are still people who try and study philosophy and literature and history and geography and some of them do it for fun, and some, you know. But in general, the most powerful force that draws people out of the education system is the labor market. And so that has very little to do with what the people going into the education system, like yourself, really aspire to. I don't know whether you went into the, I know that our parents also force us, because that's how they've been socialized, that look, you've got to go to school and to university and you've got to get a profession. You've got to become this or that or the other. But those demands or those aspirations are also shaped by social history, by what has been happening throughout the development of capitalism in every country in the world and in our country. So the idea that somehow education is going to resolve the problems of unemployment or the problems of social inequality, of injustice, and so on and so forth, is there are elements of it, yeah, which might do that, which could help towards that. But in general, and there are struggles within education which do that. That's the difference. You know, the book by Bowles and Gintis, which talked about schooling in capitalist America, argues what I've just said, that, you know, education's function is largely to serve the labor market. But there were a number of criticisms of that view, of that very dim view, because as a matter of fact, education institutions can also be used for developing critical minds, for rethinking the nature of society, for making for developing social movements and organizations, and as we are now doing, as people are doing, as people on the ground are doing, as we all know, is beginning to happen with a completely different conception of what kind of economic system, what kind of social system we should have.
Thanks, Olwam.
Thank you, and I want Neil to come and ask the question. Please come through, Neil.
Who's that? Who is there? Is there a question that I'm supposed to see?
Yes, and a question that Neil is asking is a question that he's interested in is this period of the local government election, or in this period of the local government election, how do we create a more meaningful and functional engagement with communities on the questions they struggle with daily beyond the limitation of the exchange of promises and lies? What can strengthen communities in that conversation so that the power balance of exploitation can find some equilibrium in relation between the people, the economy we represent, and the aspirations of our people?
Well, I don't have the answer to that question. What I do know, however, is that communities, social movements are answering that question better than I could ever answer them. As a matter of fact, this COVID pandemic in this very city, Neil, has given rise to a number of locally based initiatives. You know, initially the biggest problem was food. And what we saw straight away was the development of food gardens. In fact, we began to see collectives of food gardeners getting together to form food assemblies, completely unsupported by local resources, completely. So already people are beginning to see that relying on and waiting for political promises to materialize might not be the way out of the present predicament of the great majority. So there is now a gathering discussion taking place, not only in those communities, but nationally, internationally, globally, all over, about a new conception of economic and social life based on what is called solidaristic economies, cooperative economies, the commons, the way in which the commons can be reappropriated to be made useful for ordinary people who don't have to continue to rely on promises which appear never to be realized. Now, I think that Olwam, you need to organize a full and proper discussion around this issue. It is now, my own little research I have done on this issue, because I am deeply interested in solidarity and social economies, is that there are now over 800 million people globally who are involved in one or other form of alternative economy outside, because there are about 1 billion people who are permanently, structurally unemployed. Permanently unemployed. How are they surviving? Well, some people are beginning to say, let's get on with creating an alternative economic system. They are largely based on, in our society, we have stokvels, but these are not economic systems. They are just saving systems. But there are now places in the world where there's now solidarity economies for finance, for consumer goods, for production goods. I can give you tons of examples. The gross value of output about 10 years ago of these solidaristic economies was already at that stage
stage, some $800 billion. It's a drop in the ocean of capitalist production. But it is saying to all of us that there is no future in trying to knock our heads against a system which is completely unable to understand the requirements of ordinary people, the great majority of the world's population. It's about time we took the process into our own hands. It's about time we start asking our own questions. That's the point I was making. It's about time we start thinking through our own solutions. Yeah. And as I was rightly saying, once again, the system tells us that TVET is the way out. Well, from the work that Ivor and his unit have been doing, they can tell you that the TVET system is turning out artisans who are unemployed. Not for 1 year. You know them, Olwam. There are people amongst you who know all of that. I don't have to tell you. But the point I want to make is that, in answer to Neil, is that there is no quick answer to say, look here, if we ask the politicians to do this, this is what will happen. I don't think that will happen. I'm beginning more and more to think that unless social movements, communities are respected, and unless one follows what is happening, what is actually happening. If we had R1 billion, which we used to build this football stadium, if we had that R1 billion today, we'd wipe out hunger in the city. We'll wipe out hunger in the city within a year. If we had R1 billion, if we just simply support community initiatives, which are already there, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands of people willing to do that with the absolute minimum resources. There's no water, there's no seed, there's no implement, there's no electricity in the food gardens they want to produce, and all of that can be easily provided. By the way, I'm not an abstainer. I don't say don't put pressure on government. I'm for pressure on government, especially at the local level. Those resources belong to the people. They don't belong to government. They belong to you and me and the ordinary communities of the society which gave up the labor time to produce the wealth that this society has. So I'm not one of those who's saying, no, let's ignore government. No, I support fully those who think that you must put pressure on public resources because those resources belong to the people. But we can't wait. We cannot wait for that. We have to listen to the voice of what is the sound of what is beginning to happen everywhere in our communities.
Enver, I think you've touched on Ivor's question. Can I just ask if you can see the questions in the chat room? I read them out.
Sorry. No, I can't. I don't know where the chat.
Okay, Ivor was basically saying what you just responded to. Once again, the system tells us that TVET is a key way out for youth. This alongside entrepreneurial spirit and SMME, and not to mention the big 4IR. What is your response to this? I'm just going to read all of them so that you just summarize, or because you have touched on some of them.
Well, Ivor knows the answer. He knows the answer to that better than I do because he's working with TVET students and he knows what has happened. Those TVET students, I can't remember the figures now, but Olwam, over the last 2 or 3 years, some 50 or 60 TVET students in engineering have qualified. In engineering. Remember, if you read all the public media, what are the greatest skills that are required? Engineering are the greatest skills required. Well, we have from one college, and we have 50 colleges in the country, I think, Ivor. I don't know how many, I think 50. producing TVET graduates in engineering, most of whom are unemployed.
So this is exactly what Thamsanqa Motala is actually bringing, and it was a question I was going to ask as well. But let me read what Thamsanqa is asking. How do we move forward appreciating existing yet endangered indigenous knowledge and creativity, which can be extracted and inspire indigenous people to be able to critically participate in the economy when the education system is limited to the one language, which is English, or Africans in our institutions on higher learning? I don't know if you got that, but yes,
the essence of it.
yes.
I don't think that there's any mystery in indigenous knowledge. I don't think there's anything complicated about it. I don't think it's something which requires deep research and a discussion of a range of philosophies. Indigenous knowledge is the knowledge that is happening on the ground, that people are busy using at the moment to survive, because they are not able to survive through the knowledge produced in capitalist economies in this country and globally. People are busy using indigenous knowledge. I went a few years back with a colleague of mine or two to visit various sites where people were doing their own food gardening. Amongst those, we went to see Abalimi Basekaya. And there was an old woman, Mama Kaba, from the Transkei in Cape Town, who had started these gardens under the street lamps, next door to schools, next door to football fields, all over. And we saw that out of the knowledge that she brought along with her, she was from the Transkei somewhere, and she moved to Cape Town, thinking that this wonderful city will give me a job and will look after me and my children and so on and so forth. And she soon realized that that's just a dream. But she said, I have skills, I have knowledge, I have a background, I have a long history of knowledge. I come from people with historical knowledge, especially around agricultural production. So she began using it. Of course, she didn't have land. So they began finding land wherever it was and just simply starting up stuff there. And, at the time we were speaking with her, there were now over 4,000 members in that. This is 10 years ago, 4,000 members producing food, not only for themselves, and selling it on Wednesdays to middle-class people in Philippi. They managed to get a little kind of warehouse where they were able to sell it. Now, we went to see other similar initiatives all over the country. Of course, this business of small business enterprise support and, Kula and all these things, they don't know of the existence of people like her. I don't know what it is, but I think they have their own friends, and so they just don't bother to worry about people like her. And there are hundreds like her all over the country, and there are many initiatives like that. The point I'm making is that you don't have to look far, you don't have to look deep. Indigenous knowledge systems are operating, they are happening. There are people who are fomenting all kinds of medicines using the knowledge they have. Yes, as we have been trying to get community colleges and TVET colleges to support this kind of learning, to support the learning that comes from from communities, use the learning that is already there. But of course, you can never get past the accreditation and qualification and certification systems, etc., etc. So all I'm saying to all of us is we're looking in the wrong place. let's start looking in the right place. For those of us who want to continue to look upwards into the bastions of power, you're welcome to do that. My intuitive guess is that you will be looking there for a long, long time. My inclination is to look downward, look sideways, look with and to and amongst the people with whom you are. And there the knowledge is beginning to thrive because people have learned that formal knowledge systems are not going to solve the problem.
I want to, in fact, Siya Zondani, and I assume this is Siyabulela Zondani, is basically commenting first that you paint a very dim picture for the modern middle class. In the recent past, the middle class has been burdened with the responsibility of mobilizing and shaping a society that they want to see. Do we surrender, that's a question, do we surrender ourselves to the trajectory that Piketty outlines, or do we reimagine a new reality for ourselves as a generation and those who come after us? We have 8 minutes remaining, but I want you to answer that question, and then further down are just comments which I want to.
What's the first? There's a first part which has to do with middle class.
So the middle class.
And a second.
The middle class is a comment that maybe it's a preamble.
Okay, well, let me say something about the middle class. The data is showing that the middle class globally is diminishing, is sinking downwards as inequality gathers pace. The people who are falling down into poverty are the middle classes also, the lower middle classes. And, you know, when I see the data suggesting that in South Africa we have, I don't know how many million middle class, you know, I really, you know, I could burst into all kinds of very bad words. So the middle classes, I'm afraid, cannot have the answers for the problems of our society because they constitute a smaller and smaller fragment of our society. By the way, even the employed classes, even those who had fixed jobs, are becoming more, and as my colleague and comrade Mnqwazi Hlatshwayo will tell you from the detailed research he's doing, that the world is increasingly producing precarious workers who do not have the conditions of employment which their parents might have had. They are no longer in that kind of relatively more secure position. And the whole world is going that way, including in the most advanced capitalist countries of the world. Now, the question of Piketty's solutions are tax and more tax. That's his approach. His approach is, given the extraordinary increase in inequality, the solution to it is that we must tax the rich much more and try and equalize in that way. There is another global discussion group called the Transnational Network, or GTN, Global Transition Network, which is now saying we need to have a global government, a government which represents, as it were, global interests, the interests of the global poor, I suppose. The real problem with all of these things is that the question is, what's the mechanism for getting, who is going to agree to this? You know, in South Africa, we attempted to levy a once-off wealth tax, just once off, you know, historical inequality, people who were privileged for generations. We ask you, please, to put your hands in your bank balance and once off, give us X. I can't remember. I don't know what the figure was. Well, there wasn't even the political will or the appetite or the directive energy to get that done. Who is going to tell the global rich that you've got to give up? You've got to give up more by way of taxes. And taxes, by the way, I mean, there's a very detailed article on this issue also I saw the other day. Taxes, by the way, don't constitute the main place where money is hidden. Wealth, so by dipping into people's tax box, you're not really scratching their wealth all that much. The problem is not wealth, tax redistribution. The problem is the social structures in which, by which wealth continues to flow into exactly the same pockets. And so Mr. Piketty, his nice liberal solutions are exactly that. They are just nice liberal solutions, but they do not deal with the fundamentals of social inequality and injustice.
Thank you very much, Enver. It's exactly 1957, so we have 3 minutes to conclude before 8. So thank you very much. I see the comments. Thank you everyone for coming through. Thank you, Enver. I know we cannot have enough time to actually have all the questions we want, but I think the message that you are speaking about, for me, it has always given me a different understanding of what is expected out of me, where everyone keeps on telling me that it is my fault that I'm unemployed, it is my fault that I'm not educated enough, it is my fault that I'm in debt, it is my fault this and that. The message that I've always received from you and the collective of the Education Policy Consortium to a large extent has been that there are much more critical issues and critical questions that we need to pose ourselves, and not just take any tag that is put on us, not just take any question that is posed towards us and treat it as if it doesn't have its own interest. You are again telling us today that we must always ask, with this question, who is it going to benefit? What interest does it serve, and who's posing the question? And those people won't actually give us or engage in a conversation that they won't benefit anything from. And more often than not, we don't look into who is asking the question and for what purposes are they asking the questions. And another thing is that I've never felt as if I needed to grow a little bit more in order to have a conversation with academics, with people in business, with anyone, that as someone in society, I don't even come as empty-headed or without any experiences. Really put this so very hard on us that we should always, in a way, treat our own questions seriously. They don't just come from nowhere, because also our interest and what we are concerned about needs to find a space, whether it's in academic space or whether it's in the economy. But who we are as we are, yes, we keep on learning, yes, we keep on growing, but we don't have to be compromising everything about ourselves until death. And this is a problem that our young people are facing, is that they doubt everything that they have, everything that they know. Even after all these years, they still are made to believe that they need to give or study a bit more or be exposed a bit more, learnership, internship, and all these things, because you are never really ready. And that's why I thought Enver would be a great person to start us and our community to just pose these questions towards one another. And of course, the time will always be a challenge So thank you again, Enver. I hope you want to say closing remarks before I close.
Well, simply to say thanks to you, Olwam, for organizing this. And I do request you to please send those documents to everybody, because they must use them to study and to find others which might be of use to them, and to develop their own analytical strengths out of that. Thank you very much. I appreciate your giving me this opportunity, and I hope that in future you will have some young people doing this, and I'll listen in. Thank you very much.
No, we will. Thank you very much, Enver. And thanks to everyone who attended. All the best with everything. Go and vote. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, good night.
Good
Bye,
night.
everybody.